I'm here with Neil Von Heupt, Programs Manager for AITD. I want to thank Neil for taking the time to share his thoughts on micro-credentialing and lifelong learning with us today. Neil, before we get started, I wonder if you could let us know about your role at AITD and also the association.
Sure. So the Australian Institute of Training and Development is a membership association for trainers, learning and development professionals, organisational development professionals. We're Australia's largest organisation, been running for over 40 years now, and my role there is the programs manager, so I look after the professional development offering that we offer to our members, and that's courses and online communities of practice, webinar series, mentoring program, all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So Neil, what would you say would be the hot topics in industry today from a learning and development perspective?
It's an interesting question, actually, because I think there's actually just one hot topic, one thing that's actually driving all of the other hot topics. As I was preparing for this, I was like, what are they? And there's one thing which drives it all, which is sustainable performance improvement. Businesses want to know, industry wants to know, can you do your job? That's the kind of starting point. But more importantly than that, can you do it better? Can you do it faster? And can you keep on doing that? Can you continue doing that, being better and being faster at your job kind of thing? It's kind of like that old paint ad, the keep on keeping on. It's not just a question of are you competent, but it's a question of can you continue to be competent. Now, if you take that as the driving question, that idea of sustaining performance improvement in people, then the other things almost just kind of fall in line behind it. So there's the obvious kind of pressure to integrate technology into the workplace and into how people learn kind of thing. But again, that's driven by this idea of performance improvement. So can the technology improve the performance of the people that we have here? And if the technology doesn't do that, then that's no longer a driving question. People look at augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and they go, okay, this is an interesting kind of concept. Can it apply to learning, and will it help us to drive performance improvement, and will it help us to keep up, to be ongoing with our thing? All of those other kind of questions around learning transfer, hot topics of micro-credentialing, of micro-learning itself, all of those actually, I think, behind them is this question of sustainable performance improvement. And I think that actually drives all the other ones.
So therefore, Neil, in light of that, what would you see, and if you had to choose three, what would be the main challenges that face the L&D community?
There's some big ones, actually. I think one of the first ones is around credibility. So for a long time, the profession has been seen as you're the training providers. And they haven't really kind of had that sense of we are people who contribute to the overall success of the business. Oh, no, you just deliver training, you know? And so there's a kind of an issue of credibility, and a lot of people in the profession ask the question of how do we get a seat at the table kind of thing? And really the way to get the seat at the table, at the C-suite table, is to be having that whole of business mindset and how can we deliver value to the business. And I think rightly, if we're not offering that value to the business, then not only do we not deserve the seat at the table, but we actually end up being on the menu at the table. And so there's that issue of credibility. I think there's a challenge for us is how do we be a community of learning and development professionals? Because we've got some outstanding thinkers in Australia. So we've got world leaders in the recent top 100 e-learning people, for example, is a list that comes out each year. Australia had 7 people in that list. So we punch above our weight as a profession in Australia. We've got some outstanding thinkers. But I think as a community, we have to be careful to bring everybody along on that journey. So, for example, with micro-credentialing, we've got some people who are outstanding in this field. They're doing some great work in micro-credentialing, but there's a whole lot of people in the profession who really don't have their head around it yet. And there's a challenge to actually, for the people who are out the front leading the way, there's a challenge to say, actually, how do we bring these people along with us rather than just getting so far ahead that they get left behind kind of thing. And I think that's an important challenge. And the third one, I think I think it was Ryan Tracy actually gave it the name the other day, the shiny toy syndrome, that we like new things, we like kind of exploring new things, but there's a risk in that. There's a challenge in that for us to make sure that the things we're trying are actually evidence-based, that they're credible, and that they end up contributing to business performance. So they'd be my top three: the credibility idea, the idea of taking the whole community along with us, and that idea, the risk of shiny toy syndrome which ties back into the credibility one, I guess.
So Neil, you mentioned micro-credentials. What would you say is the current state of thinking around the value of micro-credentials within industry?
I think it's still early days for it. There's some, as I said a minute ago, there's some great people doing some great work in the area of micro-credentialing, but there's a lot of the industry that doesn't know what it is. I still am having regular conversations because we run the digital badging program, and people ring me and just say, tell me about how that works. How does digital badges work? I don't understand it. I'm still having those conversations regularly and they're with seasoned L&D people. They know what they're doing, kind of thing, but they haven't quite caught this bit of what's happening in the profession. And also people just kind of going, is that just a fad? Is it another shiny toy that people have jumped on, or is it something that's going to be around for the long term? Now, I can answer those questions when they do it. I don't think it is a fad kind of thing, but I think there is a risk with it. And it goes back to the kind of credibility and performance improvement stuff, that if what the micro-credentialing is recognising, if it doesn't actually meet the needs in industry, then I think the idea of the micro-credentialing is at risk of sliding away. If it's not actually delivering what people are looking for, kind of thing. So I think it's early days. I think there's great potential for micro-credentialing, but I think we've got to manage that risk quite carefully.
So to expand upon that a little further, Neil, you mentioned that AITD does offer badges to its members. Mm-hmm. Why did you believe it was important to offer that, and how was it being received by your members?
Sure. It was funny how we got started. We had a lady, Joyce Sightsinger, presented at our conference in 2015 about digital badges. And at the end of the presentation, I walked out thinking, this is something we should be exploring as an organisation. And I walked over to our CEO at the time, and as she walked towards me, she started speaking and saying, we need to be looking at that, digital badges. And so we were standing there talking about it. And then about 2 minutes later, the national president of our board walked over towards us and said, we should be looking at those digital badges. And so between us, we went, okay, let's get into it. And Joyce was actually really helpful for us in setting up the program that we have. And we offer them in 4 different areas at the moment. So we started initially as a way of recognising the professional development that we do. So we do it for our courses. Some of those are face-to-face courses, some of them are online courses, and we recognise those with digital badges. But our membership offering is much broader than just the courses that we run. Mm. So we then expanded the badges that we offered, and so the badges now extend to membership, that the membership of the association is recognised with the badges. We then extended to one that we call professional contribution. So we have people who maybe write for our magazine or are mentors in the mentoring program. People might present webinars for us, and we recognise that contribution that they make. And then we also have our industry awards program, the National Excellence Awards, and we have digital badges as a way of recognising the achievement that people make within those awards. In terms of acceptance, it's a straight numbers game for us, and it's really worked. So in the 2 years since we started issuing digital badges, we offer about 30 different badges across our courses and the different categories I was just talking about. But what's been interesting is that we've had over 33,000 interactions with those badges. Now, 98% of those interactions are on LinkedIn, and that's mainly because the Credly badges that we use, they actually talk to LinkedIn, and they will pull into the certification section on your LinkedIn profile if you have it activated. And so I might be wrong. My suspicion is that the hard copy certificates that we used to give out for membership and the courses that we ran, my suspicion is they weren't getting the same level of interaction as 33,000 interactions in the space of 2 years. So I will acknowledge that our community is probably more interested in what they are than your average kind of person out in the business world kind of thing. But I still think for us, the numbers are making the decision, do we keep going with this? And we look at the numbers and go, yes, we do. These are working and people are interested in them.
Right. So Neil, there's a lot of media hype at the moment around automation and the jobs of the future, or lack thereof. So how do you feel employers are addressing this now? And what do you feel needs to be in place from a training perspective for employees to be able to navigate the changes and, I guess, the shifting job market?
Avoiding the robot apocalypse, that's what it's all about. Actually,
Indeed.
I think there's actually quite a bit of fear around it. And I think for a lot of people, they're kind of starting to look at their roles and go, hang on, am I at risk here? And I think in that, it actually gives the learning and development community one of its greatest opportunities to actually kind of address that fear and to equip people to face that fear and to face the kind of consequences of these changes, which are happening at the end of the day. Like, it's not changes that will happen, but they're changes that are happening. And for me, it comes back to that initial idea that I talked about of sustainability. So it's not just a question of, can you do your job? Are you equipped to do your job? It becomes a question of, are you equipped to do your job? And can you stay equipped to do your job? And that's where L&D jumps into the scene, actually giving people the tools and giving them back to them. I heard it was an interesting presentation by Rob Wilkins, who's now looking after the learning management system for the New South Wales Department of Education. And he had this great phrase, and I was like, oh, that's so good. And it was just to let go and let learn. And it was that idea of actually kind of giving up. So for a long time, the L&D community has kind of held close what we do in learning. We run courses, we train people kind of thing. And whilst we took on the 70-20-10 model and we went, yeah, okay, 70% is happening informally and 20% is happening socially. What we do is the 10% kind of thing. We totally need to shift that because the 70 and the 20, which we kind of went, that's what individuals do, they look after themselves. That's actually part of our job as well, is to embrace all of those areas of learning and to be intentional about them, to have a plan for them, to design for all of those things for that informally. And that's where I think the micro-credentialing can actually kind of help us, because historically, the only learning that we were recognising was the formal learning. You do a course, we will give you a certificate. You read a book, you engage in a community of practice, you attend a series of regular professional development events. We never really had a way of kind of capturing those. And we do now with micro-credentialing. We can actually kind of say, okay, well, if you participate in this particular community of practice over a 6-month period, then we can do a digital badge that recognises that continuing professional development in a way that we didn't have before. So I think there's a great opportunity for learning and development there.
Let's pretend that I am a new graduate coming out of X institution. How do I communicate all of these amazingly wonderful competencies that I have to you as a future employer?
So one of the keys, I think, in this is, I mean, obviously you've got your typical kind of CV, resume, LinkedIn profile kind of thing where it's listing all of those things. I think one of the keys in that, and it is one of the things that plays into the micro-credentialing kind of idea, is around the metadata that people can then access around your capabilities. So for us, one of the best parts with the digital badges is that it says who it's from, and that's increasingly mattering to employers who your credentials are coming from, particularly the vet sector ones had a bit of a hammering over the last few years in terms of some of the providers providing a kind of lesser standard of education. Employers are starting to look at who are the providers of these credentials that you're supposed to have. And then also for us within that metadata, we're actually able to say, well what's the content that we looked at here? So rather than just saying, okay, I've done a course about e-learning, to say, okay, no, I've done a course that's looked at the tools, that's looked at design, that's looked at how do I incorporate social and collaborative learning, that's looked at how do I make it compliant and accessible to people, that actually spells it out in a way that a hard copy certificate never could. And I guess that's the big advantage of those micro-credentials. I guess there's a challenge of how do you make that visible to an employer? And for us, that's why we ended up with Credly, because it was one of the ones which connected easily through to LinkedIn, and it suddenly made this learning that people have been doing visible to people. But yeah, so I think it does come back to that idea of the credibility of the credentials that you're presenting to people.
Neil, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us and to share your thoughts with the Micro-Credentialing workshop. I guess to wrap up, what are your thoughts on where to take this now, where to go?
Thanks for having me. I would have actually liked to be down at the conference, but I'm actually, whilst you're sitting here, I'll be presenting at our national conference in Sydney. One of the things I like about learning and development people is that at our heart, we like making things better. Better for individuals within the workplace, better for the organisations that we work for, and ultimately, better in a much bigger kind of sense than that. And so we do keep trying new things. We do, and there is that shiny toy risk in that, but we do keep trying new things. And even in a sense, like the micro-credentialing is an example of that. We looked at, hey, those big qualifications, they're great, but they take so long and they're pretty hard to do kind of thing. Is there a way we can kind of break it down to some smaller units that are a bit more achievable for a wider range of people and that give us a bit more transparency and visibility? And we ended up with the micro-credentialing kind of concept. And it was an experiment at first. People didn't know if it was going to work. And so I find myself often saying to people, you have to keep trying new things, and you have to keep trying new ways of kind of approaching what you're trying to achieve and experimenting a bit. And they're not all going to work. There's a risk that the micro-credentialing thing isn't going to work if we don't back it up with credibility and people with the skills that we need. They're not all going to work, but we do have to keep trying things. Now, I actually wrote, and it might sound a little bit strange, but to finish off, I wrote a little poem for this conference that you have on micro-credentialing, because I went, okay, I wouldn't normally finish with a poem. I don't know if it's going to work. It might be a really bad poem, okay, but it's on a model, a friend of mine. It's just 2 lines and then a single word, and I thought, okay, I'm going to explore this idea through poetry because I want to model that idea of trying something else. So my poem goes like this. It says, I can't get away from micro-credentialing. Recognition of competency stalks me. Badgered.
Nice.
There you go.
Very nice.
There you go. Thank you for having me. I hope the conference goes really well, and we will be continuing to make use of micro-credentialing, and hopefully that will track well into the future as the kind of idea of it grows.
Thank you so much, Neil. Greatly appreciated.
You're welcome.